The Heian-kyo period is a period in Japanese history that lasted from year 794 to 1185 years. It lasted approximately 400 years and is widely regarded as a historic moment in Japanese history. Heian is a Japanese word that meaning peace, and it is named after Heian-kyo, Japan's ancient capital, which is now known as Kyoto. Until 794, Japan's Heijō-kyo, which was relocated in Nara Prefecture, served as a country's formal capital. It followed the Nara period, which began when Emperor Kanmu, Japan's 50th emperor, relocated from Tokyo to Heian-kyo or modern Kyoto. It was a time in Japanese history when Chinese influences were diminishing and the country's culture was maturing. The Heian period is also known for its art, particularly poetry and literature, and is regarded the peak of the Japanese imperial court. Heian period includes the invention of basic Japanese writing, hiragana, and katakana. It originally enabled female authors to express their thoughts easily in writing, which eventually resulted in a number of great works and literature.
Konnichiwa everyone, I am Judy Liritsy Flores and I am from group number 4. I will discuss the subtopic Politics in Heian period. Before the Heian-kyo or the Heian period, in Japan, the political center was run by powerful imperial families and clans. So, one of the most notable clan before the Heian period was the Fujiwara-shi family. The political center at that time was called Heijō-kyo, and the Fujiwara family or the Fujiwara-shi clan ruled Japan from its politics or political activities from Nara, which is the period before Heian, and also the Heian itself. To keep the power in the family of the Fujiwara-shi, the clan encouraged their daughters to marry emperors so that they could keep the power within their own clan or family and transfer it to the next generation of the said family, which is Fujiwara or Fujiwara-shi. Second Seiki politics strategy. This method or this strategy of politics is what the Fujiwara-shi used. This strategy was proven to be useful as the family had the power from Nara period to Heian period, which is 710 Anno Domini to 1185 Anno Domini. Next, we will discuss the culture during the Heian period. In Japan, Kokufu Bunka is what we call the culture of Japan without the influences of outside or other countries. One of the most relevant features of this culture during that time is that there became a rise of female or women writers in literature. Fujiwara-shi clan or Fujiwara-shi family tend to select capable women and put them beside the emperor because emperors used to favor more females than males for assistance. The Fujiwara-shi did this so that they can have more power or they can sustain and maintain their power during Heian period. Shinden Zukori style is an architectural style that is very prominent during the said period. It has an open structure with a few walls that can be opened and closed with doors. Shitomi and Sudare, a structure in which people take off their shoes and enter the house on slits or stilts, sitting or sleeping directly on tatami mats without using chairs or bed. This means that during that time, the architectural style is very simple, whereas the people or the humans during that time in Japan tend to sleep on the floor with just a mat with them, or with just sleeping on a mat. The roof of a Shinden Zukori style house is laminated with hinoki, which is a woody or a wood that is flattened. Junihitoe dress. This dress is basically a fashion used in formal courts. This is a dress featuring multiple layers of kimono. This is not just a one layer like this, but it is a multiple layers of kimono that shows formality during that time, which is Heian period. It is worn of females and males during that time when they go to court. And it features multiple layers of kimono because during that time winter is very cold, and even the summer doesn't give much difference to the heat. Lastly, Kentoshi Mission is the mission of Japan to spread their culture and politics to their neighboring countries, mainly in China.
Let's now talk about their literature. Murasaki Shikibu was a Japanese novelist, poet, and lady-in-waiting at the imperial court during the Heian period. She is best known as the author of The Tale of Genji, widely considered to be the world's first novel written in Japanese between about the year 1000 and 1012. The Tale of Genji is given here in a new flowing translation for modern readers who will discover the profound depth of human experience in its picture of imperial court society that both resonates with and changes their own. Interior monologues are marked off with italics for ease of reading. Some annotations are embedded for accessibility and clarity, and the poetry are rendered into triplets to produce prosodic analogs of the original. Sage Nagon was a Japanese author, poet, and courtwoman who served Empress Taishi in the Middle Heian period around the year 1000. The Pillow Book is her first book. The Pillow Book is a fascinating book at life among the nobles during the Heian period, portraying the exquisite joys of a limited world governed by poetry, love, fashion, and desire, with harsh reality kept at a safe distance.
Good day, everyone. I am Beverly B. Kumpa from CED-02-401A, and I am here to present the Feudal Era of Japan. We will focus on the Kamakura period, Muromachi period, and the Azuchi Momoyama period. Our objective for today is to be familiar with Japan history, philosophy, beliefs, and culture, examine Japan historical issues, and demonstrate knowledge of Japanese feudal structure. So let's start. First, let's define feudalism. Feudalism is medieval Japan. It started on 1185 to 1603 CE. Describes the relationship between lords and vassals, where land ownership and its use was exchanged for military service and loyalty. Although present earlier to some degree, the feudal system in Japan was really established from the beginning of the Kamakura period in the late 12th century CE, when shoguns or military dictators replaced the emperor and imperial court as the country's main source of government. The shogunates distributed land to loyal followers, and these estates, shoen, were then supervised by officials such as the hito, or the stewards, and shogu, or the constables. Unlike in European feudalism, these often hereditary officials, at least initially, did not own land themselves. However, over time, the Hito and Shogu, operating far from the central government, gained more and more powers, with many of them becoming large landowners, or daimyo. In their own right and with their own private armies, they challenged the authority of the shogunate governments. Feudalism as a nationwide system thus broke down, even if the lord-vassal relationship did continue after the medieval period in the form of samurai offering their services to estate owners. In 1274 and 1281, the Kamakura shogunate withstood two Mongol invasions, or in large part thanks to storms known as the kamikaze winds. In 1333, the shogun was toppled by a rival, ushering in the Muromachi period. Shogun is the head of the Bakufu military government, with the power to oversee national affairs, receives little from emperor, usually the strongest daimyo. Daimyo, or lord of a domain, is the powerful warlord with control over territories of varying size, strength, frequently determined by the domain's kuda, tax based upon rice production. During the Muromachi period, regional warlords called daimyo grew in power at the expense of the shogun. Originally, daimyo reported to the shogun, but they often had closer contact and control over the samurai, which helped them grow in power. As defeated Hojo samurai of high status, they attract special attention from the emperor's victorious army. On their knees, these distinguished Hojo face a ceremonial execution. A single blow of the form of the headache severs the spinal cord. Death is instant. The skulls of high-ranking Hojo samurai formerly executed is evidence of unusual battle rite observed in medieval Japan. According to Professor Turnbull, there's one or the tradition that's not generally known because of a very well-developed Japanese religion or religious belief, certainly among the most high-ranking samurai. It was expected that the head would be returned to the family of the man who had been killed. The execution of Hojo samurai leaders marks the end of the Battle of Kamakura. The city now lies at the mercy of the victorious imperial army, and the emperor's retribution is ruthless. The Battle of Kamakura ended in a bloody burning. Almost the entire city was light. Fighting was going on everywhere. Men were being cut down among the smoke and the flames. Those Hojo not slain in battle or massacred in the pillaging of the city flee to the hills. So at the end of the Battle of Kamakura, the Hojo family withdrew to mountains around the edge of Kamakura, and they are committed the largest act of mass suicide in Japanese history. Kamakura burns hundreds of Hojo, embraces the samurai code, and takes the only honorable way out. One of the best known traditions of the samurai is that ghastly ritual of seppuku, which is to commit suicide by cutting your abdomen open using a sharp dagger. This was well entrenched and in samurai history and an example that every samurai knew he would have to follow in order to save his honor when he had been defeated in battle, and death was certain. The fall of Kamakura wipes out the Hojo shogunate. All these facts show how brutal and savage Japan used to be, but there are brave heroes who saved the country. Eventually, Japan descended into a period of civil war. In the Sengoku period, or Warring States period, started from 1467 to 1568 CE, Japan suffered from constant civil wars between the rival daimyo, Warlords were their own private armies who knew they would ignore the shogun and other officials of the government, which was now impotent to enforce its will in the provinces. Land was also ending up in fewer and fewer hands as the daimyo with most military might swallowed up their smaller rivals. The consequence of the social and administrative upheaval was that Japan was no longer a unified state but had become a patchwork of feudal estates centered around individual castles and fortified mansions as loyalties become highly localized. Villages and small towns, largely abandoned by the government, were obliged to form their own councils and leagues of mutual assistance, or iki. Not until Oda Nobunaga, born on 1534 to 1582 CE, who defeated his rival warlords in the central part of the archipelago in the 1560s CE, did Japan begin to look like a unified country again. Europeans first arrived in Japan during Nobunaga's rule and brought firearms with them. Nobunaga used them in his war against other samurai to unify Japan in the 1560s. Nobunaga was a brutal ruler and ruthless towards political opponents. His successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, became the second great unifier of Japan. Hideyoshi launched an invasion of Korea in 1592 to initial success, but eventually a stalemate. The Azuchi Momoyama period was a brief period at the end of the Warring States era. In fact, the period takes its name from Nobunaga's and Hideyoshi's respective headquarters. Both near Kyoto, it can be said to have begun with Nobunaga's entry into Kyoto to install Ashikaga Hoshiaki as the 15th Ashikaga shogun in 1568, and to have ended with the victory of the forces of Tokugawa Ieyasu, whose headquarters was at Mikawa, over those of Hideyoshi at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. Culturally, the Azuchi Momoyama period was marked by the increasing growth of the merchant class and the patronizing of arts such as the tea ceremony by the warrior class. Despite, or perhaps because of, an increasing interest in European culture and religion, Hideyoshi sometimes attempted to suppress Christian religious expression. Nobunaga's hostility toward Buddhism, which he expressed by burning countless monasteries and slaughtering monks, made him receptive to the influx of Jesuit missionaries from Spain and Portugal. Originally a peasant of humble origins, Hideyoshi surged through the ranks to become a leading general. His hunger for power knew no bounds. He organized 2 invasions of Korea, and both failed, and schemed to make the Spanish, Philippines, China, and even India part of his empire. Hideyoshi's obsession with complete control pushed him to execute Christian missionaries and even to order the great master of the tea ceremony, Senno Rikyu, on 1522 to 1591 to commit suicide for no apparent reason. But because of his peasant origins, Hideyoshi was never able to become shogun, and instead, he became regent to the emperor, and after Hideyoshi's death, another power struggle ensued, in which 2 factions battled over the realm. The side led by the powerful daimyo Tokugawa Ieyasu on 1542 to 1616 prevailed, and within a short time, the mighty Tokugawa Bakufu was established in Edo, now known as Tokyo. Centuries of strife were finally over. For the next 300 years, peace and order would rule the land. The Tokugawa shoguns maintained an ethnocentric policy toward the outside world. The Tokugawa shogunate in the late 1500s crushed the warring feudal lords and controlled all of Japan from a new capital at Edo, now Tokyo. By 1630 and for 2 centuries, Japan was a closed society. All foreigners were expelled, Japanese Christians were persecuted, and foreign travel was forbidden under penalty of death. The shogunate ended in 1868 when Japan began to trade with the Western powers. Under a more powerful emperor, Japan rapidly acquired the latest technological knowledge, introduced universal education, and created an impressive industrial economy. That's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something.
The Minamoto Plan emerged victorious from the Genpei War of 1180 to 85. After seizing power, they set up his capital in Kamakura and took the title of shogun. This marked the end of the Heian period and the beginning of Japan's feudal era. The feudal era of Japan consisted of three main periods: the Kamakura period, Muromachi period, and the Azuchi Momoyama period, each named for the shoguns who controlled Japan. In 1274 and 1281, the Kamakura shogunate withstood two Mongol invasions, in large part thanks to a storm known as the Kamikaze Winds. In 1333, the shogun was toppled by a rival ushering in the Muromachi period. During these periods, the emperor technically controlled the country, but in reality, the shogun had more political power. During the Muromachi period, regional warlords called daimyo grew in power at the expense of the shogun. Originally, daimyo reported to the shogun, but they often had closer contact and control over the samurai, which helped them to grow in power.
The Edo or Tokugawa shogunate, which was officially formed in 1603 by the first Edo shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, ruled during this time period. The Edo period is known as the beginning of the early modern period of Japan. The Tokugawa shogunate, also known as the Edo period, was the last medieval government in Japan. The modernization of the Meiji Restoration, the Tokugawa shogunate lasted from 1603 to 1867. The Meiji Restoration was an era of modernization did not mean that Japan during the Tokugawa shogunate was primitive. During this close to 250 years period, the rulers called shoguns helped keep Japan in a long period of peace, influenced the wealth and power of the emerging merchant class, and helped to increase the number of people living in urban cities. The shoguns also worked to try and protect Japan from Western influences, especially Christianity. By the 1500s, the power in Japan was heavily divided and feudal lords fought among themselves. One lord, Tokugawa Ieyasu, was able to put an end to all the fighting when he won the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600s. Ieyasu used his victory to consolidate the power of the lords under himself. He was able to rule in this new system from his seat of power in Edo, or modern-day Tokyo. He was named the first official shogun in 1603, thus beginning the Tokugawa shogunate. During his reign, 1603 to 1600s, that of his son Hidetada and that of his grandson Iemitsu, the shoguns were able to unify almost all political power in Japan under them and prevented any of the local lords from amassing too much power. Distrusting of Western Europe and its influence, the shoguns worked tirelessly to prevent too much Western influence in Japan. This also meant a strong avoidance of anything to do with Christianity and eventually led to a complete ban on all Christianity missionaries entering the country. Instead, the dominant religion in Japan was Confucianism. This suspicious This suspicion of the Western world also affected Japanese trade. After the Act of Seclusion in 1636, Japan did not trade at all with Western countries for the next 200 years. With only a few small expectations, they prepared to trade with other East Asian countries such as China and Korea. Economic growth was a fortuitous byproduct of the Tokugawa institutional structure. As a security measure, the shogunate required daimyo to spend about half their time in Edo period. In a practice known as alternate attendance, the daimyo in turn required their own retainers to congregate in castle towns and posted many men permanently in Edo. As the result, in the early 18th century, more than 10% of the Tokugawa population lived in cities, including some very large ones such as Edo with 1 million people and Kyoto and Osaka with around 400,000 each. The samurai became an almost exclusively urban class, with few ties to the land and little involvement in the day-to-day governance of peasant villages. Urbanization and attendance at Edo encouraged consumption and the growth of transport networks and markets, with the result that information and goods circulated widely and mostly freely throughout the country. Peace and stability spurred population growth as well, particularly during the first half of Tokugawa period, when the population grew from about 18 million in 1600s to about 30 million in 1720. Therefore, the population remained virtually unchanged. The stagnation of the population had many causes, but deliberate choices among the peasantry, including abortion, infanticide, and delayed marriage, were a major factor. The economy continued to grow after 1720, albeit at a slower pace than previously, with the result that Tokugawa Japan was a rare pre-modern example of intensive economic growth. The economy grew unevenly. Central Honshu enjoyed far greater prosperity than the northeastern and southwestern peripheries of the country, and the famine occasionally took a devastating toll on the rural population. Still, overall, the Tokugawa period was the standard of the pre-industrial world, of a time of prosperity, stability, and growth.
The samurai warrior class came to be a bureaucratic order in this time of lessened conflict. The shogunate perceived Roman Catholic missionaries as a tool of colonial expansion and a threat to the shogun's authority, and consequently banned Christianity and also adopted a policy of national seclusion. The dominant faith of the Tokugawa period was Confucianism, a relatively conservative religion with a strong emphasis on loyalty and duty. In its efforts to close Japan off from damaging foreign influence, the Tokugawa shogunate also prohibited trade with Western nations and prevented Japanese merchants from trading abroad. A series of unequal treaties in which stronger nations imposed their will on smaller ones in East Asia created further unrest, particularly the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened Japanese ports to American ships, guaranteed them safe harbor, and allowed the US to set up a permanent consulate in exchange for not bombing Edo. It was signed under the duress when Commodore Matthew Perry menacingly sent his American battle fleet into the Japanese waters. There were also many people who didn't fit into any group. Imperial figures like the emperor were above the warrior class in theory, but not in reality. Artists and intellectuals didn't fit into any class, and there were people on the margins of society who were seen as even lower than merchants. For example, butchers or executioners who were seen as dealing with impure things were often treated as outcasts. Overall, while the Japanese did guard their society and economy against outside influences, they certainly participated in trade and cultural exchange. Though the shoguns sought to manage these exchanges, restrictions loosened over time. Meanwhile, they generally managed a society whose standard of living was extremely high for the time, whether compared to nearby states or to European societies. At first, the two nations attempted to negotiate. Russia refused Japan's offer to give them control of Manchuria, which is located in northeastern China, in order to retain influence in Korea, then demanded that Korea north of the 39th parallel serve as a neutral zone. The Japanese responded with a surprise attack on the Russian Far East Fleet at Port Arthur in China on February 8, 1904, kicking off the Russo-Japanese War. The Tokugawa did not eventually collapse simply because of intrinsic failures. Foreign intrusions helped to precipitate a complex political struggle between the Bakufu and a coalition of its critics. The continuity of the anti-Bakufu movement in the mid-19th century would finally bring down Tokugawa. Historians consider that a major contributing factor to the decline of the Tokugawa was poor management of the central government by the shogun, which caused the social classes in Japan to fall apart. The main reason why Tokugawa shogunate is important is because it is the final period of traditional Japan. It was the last of the shogunates. During this time, Tokugawa Ieyasu established a government at Edo, which is now located at Tokyo, where Japan's central government remains until today. In the 1630s, the shogunate adopted a policy of national seclusion, which forbade Japanese subjects from traveling abroad. This isolation from the rest of the world would have a profound effect on Japan's future.